Starting the recording, and I'm welcoming everybody. I'm Melissa Everett, Executive Director of Sustainable Hudson Valley. Unlike most organizations that have a dramatic founding story of some David and Goliath battle, we were founded because we thought it might be useful, and it's actually proving useful because our mission is to speed up, scale up, jazz up, and leverage progress against climate change, creating communities where people and nature thrive. So our work has ranged from, marketplace engagement, helping people to actually go solar and buy EVs and that kind of stuff. We host the Repair Cafe of the Hudson Valley. I see Susie Fromer, our coordinator, on the call. But for the last few years, since, basically mid-pandemic, we were on green drinks, deep conversation with drinks kind of thing, saying, how do we use the disruption of this time? How do we lean into something positive? How do we, take more control in this, time when we were all feeling the lack of control? And a lot of us had worked on previous sustainability plans of various kinds that had been nice concept and maybe had given rise to funding programs or zoning initiatives or whatever, but that weren't really living plans. And I had the audacity to think that we could do something more unique given the times. And we've been doing some meetings with Hudson Valley Regional Council, which is our council of governments representing the counties and the cities of the Hudson Valley. And they were, willing to co-convene meetings and help, in a small way to help us realize a vision. So what I'm going to talk about today is the Regional Climate Action Roadmap and Toolkit, as it became known. It was a ponderous PDF for a while, and now it's a website, which is, it's almost like a project drawdown for the Hudson Valley, although with fewer scientists and no modeling. But it's really an effort to create a common vision with enough expertise to guide it, but not enough, drowning in data that it becomes unwieldy. So if you could just come in, please do put your name in the chat, your affiliation, how you found out about this, and just anything that you want to share about your connections to this work. So let me walk through a presentation on this initiative. Then what I want to leave enough time to have really hear from you and get some feedback. Let me start with a screen share of the actual resource, just so you have a sense of what it is. So it's hvclimateroadmap.org. It's got a menu of topics from electric power, buildings, transportation, the carbon footprint of our region, materials management, and then resources we need for regeneration, agriculture, forestry, land and water. This mostly parallels the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, with a few exceptions. In our region, we felt that water was a kind of like a silent topic. We've got too much sometimes and too little sometimes. And so we explicitly included that. And then resilient infrastructure and communities. And then what we call cross-cutting themes. So economic development, environmental justice, and education. And we wanted this not to just be a set of pronouncements of what needs to be done, but a tool for imagining the path forward and even timelines, because we know we're in a critical moment in history. There are some political headwinds supporting what we're doing. We pray that they will last. There is a lot of money moving if we can only spend it wisely and with some coordination. And we're looking at 70% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. That's 7 years, campers. So somebody asked me as we were chatting at the beginning of this call, where do I get my energy? It's from thinking about that. So we have these what we call cross-cutting themes that are the community benefit aspects of working on climate change. And we think those are what will really help motivate people and make this a more inclusive and creative process. And a section called Putting It All Together, which I would love critical feedback on, because man, it's hard to have that conversation. How to, without being over deterministic and telling other people what to do, how do we organize for impactful action? This is what we're calling a discussion draft, and it has been for some months, and it will be for another month or two. It's been organized by working groups of about 90 or more, I lost counts, skilled volunteers, and we're kind of pulling them back together to take a fresh look and welcoming new participants to take a fresh look at how we make this thing absolutely as good as possible. So I'm gonna screen share again and pull up the presentation. And here we go. So I described what it was. Really trying to get from a vision that's actionable, that says who's working on things already, who else is needed, what do we do? Parallels the climate law at the state level and the Climate Action Council, but fully independent, fairly informal. As I said, this was born during the pandemic, so there were people in meaningful roles that we just never engaged, but it was a pretty broad group focusing on collective action for the Hudson River Corridor and the Mid-Hudson Economic Region. Here are some of the organizations that participated. You can see there was county office representation, some local government. Ulster County's Economic Development Director was a part of it. Innovative NGOs like the Center for Post-Carbon Logistics, which is figuring out how to decarbonize the shipping and logistics sector. The Hudson Valley Environmental Justice Coalition, which was an informal, but for a while, very dynamic group. And, you can see the diversity. We really tried to keep our focus on three open but clear questions. What is the critical path to achieving New York's 2030 and 2040 climate commitments on the ground? So not policy, but action by organizations and agencies, okay? Who needs to be involved? And what can we, who are the fomenters of this thing, do? I have a frozen screen and a frozen slide advancing thing. There we go. So I don't need to belabor that the climate law is calling for and driving unprecedented transformation, decarbonizing the whole energy system. That's huge. I think most of you know that the State Climate Action Council was convened in a very structured, very transparent way, led by DEC and NYSERDA, with representatives that ranged from the trucking industry to environmental justice communities in the South Bronx, and met and formulated what they called a scoping plan to look at the policies and programs and specific state agencies responsible. It was a massive piece of work. And we're now in a period of time when the scoping plan has given rise to some policy designs, such as a cap and invest system to fund some of the work that's needed. They've created what's called an Office of Just Transition, whose job it is to make sure that people working in fossil fuel industries or people who are economically challenged aren't left behind, that the economic benefits are widely shared. So we're in the final period. And if you look at the roadmap online, we did create a digest of the state scoping plan for people who want to kind of dive, but they don't want to read the whole 450 pages plus appendix. And so with the climate law, with all this change and you know, with a lot of confusion in the public because it's so huge. And there are interested parties from the gas industry to the, you know, gas station operators who are, and propane delivery industry groups that are, you know, really kind of speaking out critically, but without all the facts. So you can go online and find videos. There's a classic video that says they're coming for your furnace, which isn't true. What the state is doing is phasing out fossil powered technology over several decades. So three big things that could happen, we think. Does all this happen to us? Does it roll over us? Does it fall apart because of the political confusion and difficulty of it all? Or do we shape it according to local values and resources? Do we figure out the ways that we want to decarbonize and to draw carbon out of the atmosphere that are appropriate to our region, our economy, and our culture? So part one, rapidly scaling solutions. And so this corresponds with the aspects of the climate law to shift the electric power system to renewable, to shift transportation to electric, renewable, and building, heating, and cooling. You know, I'm trusting that you all know to some extent. I can follow up with anybody who wants more backgrounding, but the state has invested a lot in creating funding streams to make it realistic for people to shift their home heating and cooling to electric heat pumps, to insulate, to you know, make their next car be an EV, or to access electric transit. It's early stage, but what do we need to do on the ground? What we've found is that the utilities have been directed to plan for upgrading the grid. The state and major utilities are working on the transmission lines. You know, all of it's happening, but it's happening in a silo. And then in a separate silo, towns are figuring out, like, oh my God, where do we put solar that's bigger than a rooftop? How do we not gobble up farmland? How do we not put it in a place that people are going to be upset about? So as we were planning, some of the participating groups started experimenting with what they could do. And to me, that is an incredibly encouraging sign. New Yorkers for Clean Power and Hudson River Clearwater and Scenic Hudson were all part of this. And between them, they had a mapping tool that could help towns to look at ag soils to stay away from and open, you know, already disturbed land and so forth. So they started creating a training program and have worked with something like 50 communities to start thinking, you know, where can we say yes in my backyard? And then how do we get our zoning organized so that we are, you know, we are installing renewable energy in the least competitive way possible. This work has given rise to the very early stages about a conversation with Central Hudson on the possibility that we could kind of align the land use planning of the towns that are motivated to go solar with the utilities grid modernization planning. This has been 2 conversations, but cross your fingers, it's starting out auspiciously. And again, you know, we're trying to create a tool where towns or agencies or active citizens or groups that want to get involved can just be thinking about the timeline forward. And so this is call it spitballed, call it a hypothesis. This is how it could happen. You know, develop a network of stakeholders. We kind of started that. Identify priority sites for renewables, engage with the utilities. So 2023, we've got that groundwork laid, and hopefully it will allow for monitoring and responding to some of the grid upgrading plans of the utilities, and, you know, continue identifying priority sites where they can help to get the grid prepared for the renewable energy. I'm going to go pretty quickly through this. Buildings, it's the same thing. The state has funded through NYSERDA a program called Clean Energy Hubs, and it's mainly being implemented by Cornell Cooperative Extension. So it's a bunch of energy coaches who basically help households figure out how to get their energy upgraded for free. And they're developing financing mechanisms. And what we're trying to do is keep track of it all. There are bank lending programs. There's a new EPA funding program going to be established called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. And these things are far from, penetrating the communities that really need the help. So what we see as the work of our partnership is to kind of expand the networks from the ground up. We have several energy coach Zoom conversations going this week, which is Climate Solutions Week. And we have reached out to networks of social service agencies to make sure they know to inform their clients who are sometimes the most in need of support. Transportation. You are looking at maybe the only person who has ever stood in the training room of a car dealership, training salespeople on ways to have a productive conversation about EVs. Every day, when I read a thing called Green Car Reports, every day there's news about an automaker that's making a commitment or that's dealing with a supply chain issue, or a new federal incentive. The hard part of electric transportation is not supply, it's demand. It's bringing it to where people need it. We worked with Ulster County to explore what's called microtransit, which is little electric shuttles. And that project was not successfully funded, but there are a few in down closer to the city that have been funded and are starting to figure it out. There's one called Dollar Ride in Queens, where they're electrifying just local shuttles. And they've created a business model for people to buy into franchising running them at not too much cost. There's another one in Ossining that has rent to buy for electric bikes. This is the Solaris and our workforce of a while back. The only Coast Guard inspected solar powered passenger vessel on the Hudson. And there's a group of naval architects who are trying to figure out how to build the next boats. Electric school buses are they're being funded by EPA, which makes them affordable. There's also conversion of old-fashioned school buses to electric. The gap is in helping school districts stay on top of this stuff. Making sense so far? So, try to crack the code on how to mainstream electric transportation, transit, and more people-powered modes of transportation is the work that we see as kind of needed for our coalition. And here we're getting in place to help the next wave of driver education programs and dealer education programs around EVs, and schools around the buses. This is the place where we did the least good job of really being, working closely with transportation agencies. So this is a grassroots transportation plan that very much needs, governmental partners to do its job. Managing waste. Garbage, 12% of our emissions. Who knew? This scary looking spider thing here is the Hudson Valley's in the middle of it. This is the flow of waste that is trucked to landfills all over the place, including a whole bunch to Seneca Meadows in central New York, in 3.5 mile to the gallon diesel trucks that idle for a couple of hours before they empty their stuff. And we were able to bring together a bunch of county recycling coordinators and others with pretty good expertise in the field, not so much with authority because they're guided by multi-year plans, but still the vision that we came up with was like, let's try to stop transporting waste. Let's figure what we can divert. Let's take a fresh look. The New York State food scrap law has driven a lot of diversion of organic material. The Repair Cafe has driven a lot of diversion of consumer goods. And Ulster County, it's just a sign of the times, has commissioned us to look more closely at how we can divert more construction and demolition waste, which is one of the heaviest and bulkiest things that we ship to the landfill. And so they are planning out what's called a reuse innovation center, which is like, think of it as a Home Depot for used building materials with some special extra flourishes. So the concept is circular economy. And, we have got this working group of county recycling coordinators saying, we will at least imagine, we will figure out what we can do to divert one material at a time. I think that's pretty promising. And it was, the kind of like group of thoughtful, committed citizens, let's ask some questions and maybe we'll get some results. So again, the timeline is, we're looking at what the materials flows are, what the initial diversion opportunities are. This stuff is big infrastructure changes and big program changes. So it's not happening crazy fast, but I'm very heartened that it's happening. And welcome to latecomers. Just please put who you are and how you found us in the chat. Alongside decarbonizing, we have to deal with the 1.7 trillion tons of greenhouse gases that are in the atmosphere as we speak. And the notion of regenerative agriculture and forestry, especially forests, turns out are the most important thing for dealing with climate in New York. And that's an extra reason why we want to make sure our renewables don't impact them. There's the working group that we were able to convene included some of the major agencies that help farmers, like Cornell Cooperative Extension. They kind of affirm work that they're doing that's beginning scaling up to just prove, regenerative practices, cover cropping and soil amendments like biochar that, prove them on diverse types of soil so that farmers can trust them, and make sure that funding is accessible, not just to big farmers, but to smaller ones. That group is continuing to meet and to say, as we look at all the pressures on land use and how home rule in New York has every town planning for itself kind of thing, where do we really establish more of a connection with towns to help them kind of re-engage with expanding conservation? And it's ongoing work. New York embraces what's called smart growth for land use planning. It gives you all kinds of incentives for planning where there's already infrastructure, but there's very little attention to water infrastructure in that picture. And as we deal with floods and droughts, we realize there is no coordinated, state level water supply and drought prevention planning process. So we're going to have to advocate for that. But I think the big takeaway from our looking at this kind of spectrum of climate solutions, dealing with materials, dealing with land and soils, and dealing with energy, is that it's pretty complex and it's very site specific. But the strategies and the opportunities are just more than we've ever realized. So agrivoltaics is one. Who knew? Who was thinking about it a few years ago? It includes livestock grazing. It also includes integrating properly sized solar panels with fruit and vegetables. So Cornell in Highland, the research center, is has started a demonstration of 50-foot high louvered solar panels interspersed with rows of apple and pear trees and grapevines. Who knew? There is low carbon concrete. That concrete conventionally is one of the worst materials, most carbon intensive materials to produce. But there are ways around that, and Hastings-on-Hudson has some demonstration projects and a local building code. P.S. We're going to have show and tell with Mayor Nikki Armacost down there tomorrow night that you're all welcome to. So I'm not going to go through every single detail here because I really want us to have plenty of time for conversation. But I am going to just emphasize that, you know, climate change is a threat multiplier. It's most harmful to the people who have been most harmed, most marginalized, and discriminated against. It's pretty bad for all of us. And so it's also a community unifier. And I've just been, that has changed my life to realize that. As we got serious, I'm going to jump around a little bit. As we got serious about looking at the environmental justice opportunities and the community revitalization opportunities in the way we do this work. The New York climate law specifically says that at least 35% of all the energy funding, all the resilience funding, all the sustainable transportation funding has to be invested in so-called disadvantaged communities. And they really did a pretty rigorous analysis of, you know, the economics and the demographics of communities, Hudson and Poughkeepsie and Newburgh and parts of Kingston, where and many others, where these resources need to be invested. And so we've spent a lot of time having long conversations with people working in some of these communities who, you know, have come into climate change from looking at community violence issues, community economics issues, education issues, and the environmental justice kind of piece of our strategy has been one of the most kind of thoughtfully worked through. And the basic premise is that, you know, we've got all this money from the state and programs from the state to make sure that poor people can afford heat pumps and to get their homes insulated and access to electric transportation, all good. But one of the stakeholders in the environmental justice conversation series of workshops said to us, that's all well and good. I trust that New York can move electrons in new ways, but I want to see how we can keep it from having the same people own all the assets. And so a big, you know, piece of our work is and will continue to be making sure that there are organized groups with deep credibility in the disadvantaged communities that can develop businesses and develop workforce and, you know, own assets. And one of the most exciting examples to me is in Newburgh. Black Vanilla Community Foundation operates out of a cafe, and they were helping, they were pulling kids out of sketchy lifestyles and teaching them coffee roasting as a workforce development kind of platform. And when they got wind of solar, they started helping them find their way into the IBEW solar apprenticeship and electrical training program. And they have helped 17 young people to get onto that career path. So the economic development opportunities are huge. The counties are well aware of it. It's hard to know how to organize it. I was on a call yesterday Mid-Hudson Pattern for Progress frames every couple of years the economic development kind of funding strategy for the region. They were asking for input. They were saying everybody is saying climate tech. We're anticipating 189,000 new jobs, and you can see some of the places where they are landing just in decarbonization before you even look at ag and forestry and stuff. And, you know, so the work we know is about just connecting those industries with markets and helping them find and grow their workforces. And we know that there are new funding programs more than ever. I will invite you all to join a webinar similar to this tomorrow at noon that is more depth on environmental justice and economic development funding. Dave Conover, who's sitting on this call, a couple of years ago, walked around a big festival and did an experiment where he just buttonholed people and said, hey, have you ever heard of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act? And like, nobody said, yeah. And there's lots of confusion and it's moving fast. So we are, you know, calling for and gearing up for an education campaign that's very action oriented. It's not about driving people under the bed, but about empowering people to plug into what's already going on in their communities. And it, you know, Climate Solutions Week, which I mentioned, hvclimatsolutionsweek.org is part of that. But we also have a group of experienced educators who are trying to organize what curriculum resources there are and make sure that all the school systems are aware of them, because understanding this kind of stuff is actually really good for your math and science head, and it's really good for your job prospects. I have jumped over a little stuff. I've jumped over climate resilience, which is more and more needed as we, you know, deal with the fires and the floods and stuff. But that really does go back to rebuilding our neighborhoods and redesigning, you know, the spaces around where we live. And, you know, if you build enough rain gardens and put white glazing on enough roofs, it starts to look like real jobs. So this is just the short list of projects that we are working on funding and in some cases have seed money for. It's Sustainable Hudson Valley. The regional council continues to be a friend and observer and participate in the meetings. And it's been an informal partnership when I say we, but it's been a very active partnership with a lot of people who are on this call. That helping to create the demand for all the things that need to happen, helping to overcome barriers, helping to, you know, get the incentives tuned right to be really meaningful in the communities. I wouldn't be anywhere but here. It's really an impact network is the best term, and that is an informal and fluid network. It will probably get more fluid in the coming months. No, I meant to, that was a slip. I meant to say it will probably get more firmed up in the coming months. Everybody give me a hard time about that in the next meeting. But this is consistent conversation, a series of meetings, and opportunities to feedback and refine this plan. So endorsing the vision, there's a little place on the roadmap you can click and make a commitment to what you're doing. Our monthly meetings, if you represent an organization that's actively working on climate solutions, let me know in the chat and I can pull you in. It's basically, we coordinate on progress around this project. We also coordinate just keeping on top of what's going on with the climate law. We are here to provide community presentations and workshops, and some of us are developing kind of a scenario planning workshop for community groups that want to figure out how to be more strategic, how to attune what they're doing to those 2030 and 2040 goals. And as I said, we are kind of rebooting our working groups for a month or two to look at the chapters, look at the analysis in the roadmap. Don't be shy, provide feedback, provide ways to make it stronger and more actionable. And late in the fall, we will be taking the words discussion draft off of there and announcing what commitments for implementation we have been able to, really stand behind. So it's very cool to see a range of cool people. And it's very cool to have gotten through this thing, not eating up the whole hour. So I can't thank you enough for, your patience in listening to all of this. And I see Michael Helm, and I didn't mention refrigerants, but it is in the materials management section too. So the Hudson Valley is the only place, to my knowledge, that has a climate roadmap. And I just would love your thoughts about how it could be used, how you see it used and what we could do to make it as useful as possible. And please unmute yourself and be bold. While people are finding their voices, I want to take the liberty of just mentioning Melanie Potapis from Hudson Valley Regional Council, because they are funded by New York to do a lot of the gritty technical assistance to help communities move forward in the climate smart and clean energy communities programs, which are absolutely essential to this effort. And then I'll get to Kaylin and Cherie. Melanie, do you want to say anything about that work?
Sure. Yeah, we're funded under the DEC's Climate Smart Communities program to provide technical assistance to municipalities that are working on greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans, both the government operations and community actions. These are, essential pieces to continuing to understand municipalities' emissions and their priority actions in the Climate Smart program, and they're often very difficult for municipalities to do on their own. So we're very happy to be able to offer this additional assistance. In the process have been, we've done 2 cohorts of the government operations actions already, and next week, actually, the community greenhouse gas inventory cohort will start. So I've been updating the Mid-Hudson regional inventory that, all Mid-Hudson municipalities will be able to get their updated community inventories from this update. So there'll be more about that soon as well.
Yeah, that's great. And some of you are familiar with the Climate Smart and Clean Energy Communities programs. They are structured programs from New York State that guide you in getting the EV chargers and the LED lighting and the insulate town hall and community education, just all the stuff. And they have category called innovative actions. So it's really empowering wherever your town is at. And these people at HVRC are quiet wizards. I don't want to overstate that, but they know a lot and they work really hard for you. Okay, Kaylin, Cherie, Nick.
Hi, thank you so much, Melissa. Great presentation. I really appreciate the update. So much is going on. Um, I'm with Escape Maker. I've run a tourism business for 23 years, focused on agritourism, green tourism, and am now a permanent resident of the Hudson Valley in the last 6 months. And so I'm just kind of getting to know the landscape and excuse me if my dog barks. I'm just kind of getting to know the, oh, sorry. Just trying to get to know the landscape in terms of the, Colonel, come on, sorry. Uh, in terms of the other initiatives that educate locals, because I also find in being involved with Ugreen, I was really wanting to get more tourism businesses involved because they really act as ambassadors for new people to the area and also new people moving in. And so your question, I think, was, how do you foresee this toolkit? How else can we expand it or use it? And my thought was that not only in terms of getting more agritourism and farms kind of in on the education piece, but I had actually written a white paper on the transportation side in running tours for many years up through the Hudson Valley, um, in connecting that last mile and trying to provide transportation solutions from Metro North, from the various bus stops out, so that we're minimizing the impact on who's coming in. And it really it kind of didn't go anywhere, although I'm starting to see maybe a little more interest in it.
Oh,
And so
been
I would,
there.
yeah, I would just, one other thought I had was in terms of the transportation piece of this, not only the transportation for locals, but also looking at kind of not necessarily a separate mode of transit, but also looking at the tourism piece of moving people through as its own project. I would love to
Would
see
you
that.
follow up with me? I'd love to follow up with you.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I saw, is it Sherry or Cherie?
Cherie. Yeah, I have a radical agenda here to drop the language of climate change totally, so that anyone could embrace regeneration, which accomplishes the goals of sequestering carbon and increasing resilience by holding water in the landscape, which makes us more resilient to flooding, drought, heat waves, wildfire, pollution, without using the polarizing language of climate change, which some people just turn off. Like, for example, in my town, there is a climate smart committee, but my town is mostly Republican, and they've, as it seems to me, they've been trying to bury the committee by not letting it meet. The person that's the chair of it, I don't think really cares about it. So she's basically killing the committee because, okay, think about it. If I'm climate smart and you don't believe in climate, then that makes you stupid, right? So, so
Yeah,
to just take
depolarizing.
climate
Thank you.
out of it.
Yeah, depolarizing is always really important, and I think consciously chosen communication strategy for the audience is really important. We've been lucky that people who don't believe in climate change just roll their eyes at us and go away. And I simultaneously believe that it's important to use the words and own the reality in a sophisticated way when possible. So there's just because it gives me heart. There's research that Yale does every few years on how does the population slice out in terms of their beliefs and concerns. And so they segment the population: alarmed, concerned, confused, detached, something like that, and then denying. And so alarmed and concerned together nationally are 53%, and in denial are 11%. And that's one of the highest in the world because there's been so much organized misinformation. But at the same time, those concerned are the majority. And so I try to, educate and at the same time say, if we're wrong about climate change, these are good things anyway. So I think you're completely onto the idea that you have to capture the value and acknowledge those layers. I don't know. Nick? Unmute yourself.
How's that?
Yeah, better.
Okay, good. Thank you for the presentation. I'm newly returned to New York. I was in New Mexico for the last 15 years. And I was, for 4 of those years, I was the director of the Office of Sustainability for Silver City. And so I'm back in New York now. I've got 3 sisters in the area. I'm in Rhine Cliff. And I just gave a presentation last night on, quote, preparing for severe climate.
Oh, that was you. Oh, great.
Yeah, here locally. Well, I want to collaborate with your organization and with others. I am very cautious about the use of my own time and what we want to do here locally in the community. And that's not to take any energy or motivation away for larger movements or those who want to, get involved in legislation and politics and state level things, et cetera. Because I think anything that raises consciousness and can do anything about climate is all for the good. My focus here is about where I live, my community, and especially the children. I'm very concerned about what's happening, especially around heat, as we go forward in the 21st century. And so, as I told the audience last night, all I can do is look out there and ask myself, what's the truth about what I see going into the future? And how I define truth is based on reputable climate experts that I've followed for years, like Professor Schellnhuber of Germany, who is a theoretical physicist and probably one of the most renowned climate scientists in the world, personal consultant to Angela Merkel when she was Chancellor of Germany, and the Washington Post Climate Group, Sarah Kaplan and Chris Mooney, Pulitzer Prize winning climate reporter, and of course NASA, the folks that got us to the moon. So these are my sources of what I call my pot that I put their stuff in, and I label that truth. And basically what they're saying, in one instance, Sarah Kaplan of the Post was reporting just several weeks ago that the UN basically says that by the early 2030s, we will have burnt through our carbon budget to protect 1.5 degrees Celsius, the most ambitious climate goal that came out of the Paris Accords. And that's only 9 years away. And so basically the UN is saying at that point, we're on the verge of catastrophic climate. And so thinking about that, I'm saying, okay, well, if we reduce our emissions, that will protect us going forward, but it doesn't change temperatures going backward. So if we're at 1.5 degrees C in 2032, capping emissions the next day after that stops, basically, I'm talking about worldwide now, stops heat going forward, but it doesn't change the 1.5 continuing.
Right.
So I look at that and I say, given the time frame, what's possible? And where my own perspective is that we have run out of time, and that changing climate globally, especially the Project Drawdown goal of stopping the unstoppable, I don't believe that climate emissions and changing the status of where we are is stoppable. So all I can do is look at, what can I bring to the party? I bring certain experiences as a housing project manager. I'm back in New York now. I've got a lot of friends here in Rhine Cliff, and with the sustainability experience I have, I want to contribute something to my community and the children here.
Great. I'd love to pull you in. I'd love to follow up with you. I think it's a complex think and feel exercise that we're dealing with. On the one hand, yeah, the carbon budget is clear, but it's also, there's an unpredictability to it. It's not like New Year's Day 2030, there's going to be a phase change. It's between now and then, we have to bend the curve. And also between now and then, we have to draw carbon out of the atmosphere. And, Michael Helm is here. I'll just shout out to the fact that all greenhouse gases aren't created equal, and refrigerant gases are among the worst and one of the least political. And Michael and his networks have helped address that, are helping address that. I think we are all a learning community and a kind of mutual support community. And, one of the things I didn't really go into on resilience, there are practitioners at all kinds of scales with all kinds of expertise who are not well networked and could do a lot more if we were. And I'm going to just lean into closure with Jeff Scales has a really sweet comment here. Climate could also be a community equalizer, same air, water, outside temperature, power source. I guess my crackpot social theory is that there are a whole lot of people who are really revved up about conspiracies that they may not be right about, but they're revved and they care and they have values. They have a reality system that's different from, I think, all of ours on this call. But as people can feel the truth of their own experience, people have all kinds of learning moments. And I think we have to hold it together and create a container that lets people, that's forgiving, that allows people, if they're figuring it out, to be part of it. Any other, I'd love for you to look at hvclimateroadmap.org. I'd love for you to email me at everett@sustainhv.org. I'd love for any of you who think there's appetite at the local level to pull us in for a workshop, kind of an imagining workshop. I'd love, I'm looking forward to continuing to work with a bunch of you on a bunch of dimensions of these projects. And we just have a new person landing for the last 4 minutes. That's all. I don't know. Further thoughts? Actually, I'm going to say I had put this down on the publicity as going to 1:30. I'm willing to hang as long as there's conversation. If, when we're done, we're done. I'm here for you. If you're just coming in, please introduce yourself in the chat. If you have other comments or questions, throw them out there.
Caitlin, did you mention some of your sort of tours and orientation is for newcomers to the area?
No, I guess more the concept that when I was working with Dutchess County Farm Fresh Tours, and we would bring people up from the city via Metro North and then transfer them via bus to various, breweries, distilleries, wineries. And it was just such a revelation to people. Some kids had never been on farms before, but, they were learning not only about farming, but just more kind of the kind of eco side, eco practices, things like that, I really felt there was such a potential to not only to educate the local community, but also educate the community that would be traveling here year after year after year, and really expand the circle to support businesses actually, greening their operations, understanding that people really appreciated that and understood, that those were the businesses that they wanted to support because they were. So I just felt there was a gap in education, primarily from the ambassadors, from the locations I was taking people to. They didn't have the resources in which to educate their visitors. So that's really where I thought might be a really good, way to kind of, kind of stack the educational resources for like the gatekeepers of the Hudson Valley, so that they were able to, uh, to expand the circle of education. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. Let's follow up on that too. Michael Helm.
Yeah, I popped in the chat that part of this Climate Solutions Week, we will be having a webinar this Friday, the same Lunch and Learn. Just like this one, it's all you can eat and drink, folks. So please feel free to sign up. Happy to have more people involved for that. I guess the one question that I heard that I was thinking of as Melissa was speaking today was, how do you get people from NIMBY to YIMBY? Recently in Warwick, we had a big brouhaha about a lithium-ion battery fire. I mean, obviously it's a serious matter, but it's like, it's a nascent technology. Actually, the safety measures were actually worked. It's just that, this big thing had to smolder for 3 days because the fire department wasn't allowed to put water on it or anything to put it out. That was the plan for that kind of fire. And, there's a lot of, Warwick is I'm from Warwick. We're the citizenship tends to be quite conservative here. And so, people saying, oh yeah, maybe this is another point where people are coming up and saying, oh, we're rushing to make all these changes and they haven't thought out all the details. How many times have you heard that? So I'm just curious about maybe Melissa, but also if there's others who have experience with switching from the NIMBY attitude to the YIMBY attitude.
Yeah, let's hear from anybody else, and then I do have a thought or two.
I have a quick example from Scarsdale, New York, and Westchester, where solar panels were being denied for aesthetic reasons. Oh, we don't like how they look. And so 20 high school kids went into the board and said, this is our future. They are beautiful. Stop denying solar panels because you can see them on people's roofs. And so sort of engagement with the youth made people in that community really look at things differently, and the board changed the rule.
That's cool.
They were denying it on people's houses?
Yeah, apparently a lot of solar, requests were being denied because they didn't like the way it looked on wherever it was, roofs or anywhere, and
I've had experience in a suburb called Enfield, Connecticut, where for a long time solar arrays on roofs had to be a perfect square or a rectangle for aesthetic reasons. And we did a presentation to the Planning and Zoning Commission looking at how different people's aesthetics were. And I showed some weird, pictures of weird fashion at football games that people thought was aesthetic. And then I just said, I understand your values. They are, you want things that are not out of control or widely discrepant, but, maybe there's a softer way to express those values. I think at a bigger scale with renewables, the folks up around Shepherd's Run in Columbia County have learned a lot. There was, a proposal for a 60 megawatt solar array, which is large by our experience, but small compared to what's going to be needed to build what's needed in upstate New York. And initially there was a pushback. And then there was dialogue between the pushers back and the supporters and, you know, Columbia Land Conservancy and Scenic Hudson. And it looked at set asides and different criteria for, or, you know, buffers. And I'm not sure, you know, they looked at the conditions to make it most palatable. And they established a working relationship. They had already messed up the zoning, so it isn't ready to go forward yet, but it's an example. I was going to say something else, but somebody save me till I think of it.
Hi, this
uh,
is Ilona.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my
Hi,
name is
Ilona.
Hi, I'm Ilona Ross, and I don't know if you can see me. I'm in the middle of I'm in my car. And I just popped on, but I'm going to listen. So I don't know if you addressed this part about how to get from NIMBY to YIMBY. I have cancer, and my cancer is not necessarily related to fuel, to, you know, like petroleum products, but as everybody knows, Cancer Alley down in Louisiana and Texas, it's all huge amounts of cancer as a direct result of you know, oil refineries. And the health aspect of cancer might be a way to change people's minds, because I'm pretty sure, I certainly haven't read anything about lithium and about electric. Well, I mean, of course, electric can have its problems, but nothing compared to petroleum refineries and plastic. So that, you know, when you bring up that aspect, that could be a way. And I mean, there's no question that plastics are, you know, incredibly involved in cancer, and, you know, so is petroleum refining.
Yep. Thank you for that, and for sharing what you shared. You know, the other thing I was going to say is, you know, this is politically incorrect, but I think we could be rushing. I think that what is needed from a climate perspective and what is needed from a coherent technology rollout perspective, there may be a disconnect. And, you know, this is going to be a hard few years while we sort it out. But I had an experience. I was riding with a tow truck driver with my car being towed for a repair. And because I'm always talking about this stuff, we immediately fell into a conversation about electric vehicles. And he said, yeah, we just came back from a 3-day safety training that all the tow truck companies had to participate in, for like fire safety, for all the different batteries, all the different EVs that have all kinds of different safety protocols. And we're worried about standing in front of our customer, trying, you know, reading the manual, trying to figure out what the hell we're supposed to do while this thing smolders. And, you know, it's big and it's hairy, and we understand we have to do it, but we're really concerned, you know. And I think that we get into, it's natural to want to compare fossil fuel impacts and electric and renewable impacts, but they're actually in a lot of ways apples and oranges. The, you know, centralized fossil fuel and petrochemical point sources are really bad. Decentralized, you know, EVs and stuff are different, but, you know, we need to understand that there's a learning curve all around. So I think we've got a group of people representing every place from Rensselaer Plateau to Warwick and Walden and Rhinecliff and down into Westchester County. That's wonderful. Look forward to seeing you all and working with you all. I put my email into the chat, and, you know, just really please follow up whatever you're thinking about your work and how we can be of help. And look at the roadmap and don't be shy with feedback. Anything else?
Got a link to the roadmap?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thanks.
Melissa.
Melissa.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good one.